Hello, my name is Miguel, and this is my podcast on American politics. I'm here with.
Hello, my name is John Mercado.
And I am Rafael Turrubiartes.
Yes. And before we begin, I want to ask my guests what is their political stance. I myself lean towards the left. You, John? Democrat, Republican, in the middle.
I'm a bit. It doesn't really affect me as much as it affects anybody else, but due to certain statements and certain things, I see myself more as a Republican.
Okay, more Republican. You, Raphael?
I would lean more to the right.
More towards the right? Alright. So you're more of a conservative. We're on opposing sides here. Alright. So, the first question I want to ask you guys is, do you think American politics are broken?
Can you define broken?
Divisive.
Yes. I mean, by divisive, I mean that there's left and right.
Okay. Can you further elaborate a little bit?
It has become more polarized.
Okay.
For example, the left has become more radical.
Mm-hmm.
And that has further created a further distance between the two.
A schism.
I do agree, mostly with how I see elections go down, with each candidate usually having like a massive amount of controversy being surrounded by them, usually by the opposing side. And so it leads to a lot of weird tactics being used in order to make sure that their candidate wins. And so it just splits us even further apart.
Got you. Alright. Now, the second question I want to ask you guys is, do you believe that the Senate gives fair representation to everyone? Now, I ask this question because I think all three of us know how the Senate works. You know, every state gets 2 senators, and in total there are 100, right? So, 2 senators for California are representing 40 million people. But then the least populated state, Wyoming, has not even a million, around 600,000. But they still get 2 votes. Do you think that is fair?
I think it's an idea that's good on paper. But I feel like if you look more into it, it makes you think, well, there's more voices to be heard. And in that way, it's going to cause more of an issue. And while it does make it seem like, well, that means that this state has more power than the other state. But you realize that the people are the power. Therefore, yes, they should have more power because they have more people.
So you think it should be based on proportion?
Population.
Yeah,
Yes.
population proportion. You, Rafael, what do you think?
Okay. I think we first need to get one thing straight.
Okay.
America is not a democracy. It is a representative republic.
Okay.
So it is based on representatives.
Yes.
And I think when the founding fathers were making this decision and how to divide the representatives, they didn't want the most populated places to decide almost everything and have more power. For that reason, he gave the states, the smaller states, those. For that reason, they gave all the states a starting number of 2 senators, starting number of 2, and then from then they based it on the population.
Okay, but do you think that the rules should be fair? Because that means that 40 million people have to split 2 votes, compared to 600,000 people having to split 2 votes. Shouldn't everyone have equal representation in national politics?
Okay, can you repeat it again?
So, California, 40 million people, right? Okay, and California only gets 2 votes, right? Wyoming also gets 2 votes, but they only have, or the state is only made up of 600,000 people. That means that those 2 votes have to only be divided by 600,000 people. But the 40 million people have to divide those 2 votes as well. So they don't get an equal representation. Do you think they should get equal representation? Is that not democracy?
I believe that it is right how it is right now. Because that way the smaller states are not screwed over, in other words.
But see, I don't think this is another issue. This is another issue that I want to bring up. When the founding fathers, like you said, when they were creating our system, right? They assumed that the competition was going to be between states, right? That's why they made the rules fair. Everyone gets 2 votes, but states. Now the competition isn't between states; it's between political parties. Do you, Raphael, what do you identify first? As a Texan, or do you first identify as a Republican?
A Republican, I guess.
Right? Your strongest political identity right now is political parties, not between states. No one says, "Oh, I'm a Texan first before I'm a Republican." No one says that. It's always, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And there's always those that, libertarians. But because of that, the rules that they established aren't necessarily fair for political parties. That is why I'm asking you, do you think right now the system that we have is fair or correct?
I think the system has been working really well for us, and as far as as far as the system being rigged, I don't believe so, because we have had multiple different political parties and leaders from both sides of the political spectrum.
Okay. Now, this 2 votes thing, you know how I told you that, they get, so that means that less power, the less amount of people within the state, that means they have a little bit more representation than the 40 billion people in California.
Okay, a better way to put this is, imagine that we have 2 parties of people, and this one party of people has 4 people, the other party of people have 800, and they only have 2 cakes for each party. For everybody to get their own slice of the cake, they don't have much smaller slices, much smaller impact on the thing. Meanwhile, these much larger cakes would have about 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be getting half of a cake to themselves.
Exactly.
However, it would make more logical sense for the much larger party to have much more cake. That way, each person has the equal amount of power, just as the other people did in the opposite party.
Yes. Okay. That is the point that I'm trying to come across. The system right now, and when I say the system, I specifically mean the Senate. It gives Republicans an advantage because Democrats tend to cluster in large urban areas, and then Republicans tend to dominate rural areas. And I don't say this just because it's just my own hypothesis. I say this because in the presidential election of 2016, if you look at a map, every single Democratic vote typically came from a large urban area, and then a lot of Republican votes came from rural areas. And that's how it is in nearly every other election. You saw the same result with the recent Senate election with Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz. Beto O'Rourke won all of the major cities, but Ted Cruz won all of the sparse populations throughout the state, which is how he was able to win. So the Senate I see the Senate giving an advantage to Republicans. That's how I see it. Because since they dominate rural areas, sparse population, they are going to get more representation in that house, right? Okay, so yes.
Okay, so you're saying that since the smaller states seem to proportionally have a greater representation compared to the large states. However, just try to get facts straight. How many representation does California have, for example? Do you know?
How many what?
How many
representatives?
Yeah.
In the House of Representatives? They have 55. I'm sorry, not 55. 40. No, 55, yes, 55.
And Wyoming?
Wyoming, 1.
So you can see there's still a huge difference. The difference is very minute, So.
What? 55 to 1? What do you mean?
Like you're saying that since the smaller states have a greater representation proportionally
in the Senate.
In the Senate. Okay, can you?
Can
you pause it?
Okay.
My opinion is that the way that things are, that each state has 2 senators. The purpose behind that was so small states would have enough representation.
That is true, right? But that is the problem. The competition is no longer between states; it's between political parties. So yes, you are right. It was meant to. The Senate was meant to give equal representation to smaller states. But the competition for representation is no longer between states. It's between political parties. You just said it yourself. You're going to identify first as a Republican before you identify as a Texan, right?
I guess, right?
Okay. I guess, right?
I guess.
So then, if the rules are no longer fair, does that not mean Republicans get an advantage?
Well, the thing is,
Uh-huh.
The political views or the political majority in a state can change throughout the years.
True.
There's some states that they could be Republican one year, and then the next year they could be Democratically.
Iowa.
Yeah, for example, yeah. So I think it really depends on the candidates and what they do in their strategy in order to get more votes.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I would say that it is fair, and there's no such thing as being rigged.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the Electoral College. Okay. So, do all of us know how the Electoral College works?
No.
No? So, the Electoral College is first it was a compromise between the founding fathers because one side wanted to elect a president by using the legislative branch, but then another one wanted to use the popular votes, right? The whole
Okay.
country. So then they're like, okay, so we're going to create an Electoral College where the whole country is going to vote on people who are then going to vote on the president.
Okay.
All right. So then these people are the ones who choose the president. That is how it's chosen. The popular vote in this instance does not matter whatsoever. So every state, the number of electors that each state gets is just the sum of their the representatives in the House of Representatives and their senators. So California has 57, right? 55 representatives, 2 senators. Okay. Now, the problem that I see with the Electoral College is that it is a general ticket system, which in other words just means that even if the margins are small, like in a state like Iowa can be a swing state because it can either be Republican one year and then Democrat the next one. So, even if the margin is between 49 and 50, very small margin, it doesn't matter
51.
whether, yes, 50 and 51. It doesn't matter whether you got
49 and 51 now.
Yes, 49 and 51. Okay, it doesn't matter whether if you got those 49 votes. The person with the 51% is going to get the whole state, all of the votes. I don't think that is fair because it doesn't truly represent the entire state. Because there are still Democrats that want the other candidate.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right? So I would say, or I would argue that the Electoral College either should disappear in general or should be changed to a congressional district.
Yeah, honestly, it just feels like kind of like an extra step that doesn't really need to be taken.
It has
it
distorted.
overcomplicates things, and people are like, "Oh, too rigged" or whatever. And I just feel like that would kind of take out a bit of the fuel for that fire.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we've had free and fair elections for such a long time, and then you're throwing this in, it's like, well, blame it on that. Well, then get rid of the problem. If that's what you say the problem is, get rid of it.
Exactly. It distorts.
Give the people the power like you said you were over 200 years ago.
Exactly. It distorts presidential elections. 2 out of the past 3 presidents have lost the popular vote, but they still managed to win the presidency. I don't think that's fair. What are your thoughts, Rafael?
Well, I think that out of 227 years that we have used this system,
Okay.
only 5 times this has happened. Between that the popular vote and the electoral vote do not match up.
Okay.
But it is proof that it has worked for many years. And just recently, we had our first black president, and he was not Republican, by the way. And he served for 2 consecutive terms.
Okay.
And he was Democratic. Now, I don't think that in any way the Electoral College is rigged. Or
I'm not necessarily saying it's rigged. I'm just saying it either needs to disappear or change because it's not representing.
It's an excuse
States.
people can use.
Yes.
okay, I would say that the Electoral College should not be abolished or made disappear, because it has worked really well for us. And
Okay.
and
Who is us? The country or Republicans?
the country?
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the founding fathers, they really thought about this. They really thought it through when they were thinking about ways to come out with the election and everything, right? And
Uh-huh.
they thought that democracy, such as a popular vote, wasn't such a good idea. Here are just some quotes by the founding fathers. John Adams talking about democracies. He says, "Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There's never a democracy that did not commit suicide." James Madison, he also said, Where a majority are united by a common sentiment and have an opportunity, the rights of the minor party become insecure. The bad side of democracy is what is referred to as the mob rule. So, for example, let's say that in a group of 10 people, 9 voted to take away all the possessions of one of them. That is pure democracy. However, you're stepping on the rights of the minority, which is that one person. That's why the United States of America is a representative republic. Now, as for the Electoral College does not depend on a popular vote. Instead, it represents on the representatives of each state, the electors, the 538 electors, and each state can have its own way of choosing how to choose those electors for their own state. So, for example, Florida, winner takes all, basically meaning that
all of the states do that except Alaska and Maine.
Exactly. So that's all based on the state's decision on how they choose to do things, you know, and
Okay, well, you brought up an interesting point here. You said that democracy is mob rule, right? In other words, the majority rules, right? Okay, so then I want you to hear this quote by the political scientist Robert Dahl. He was really famous in the 19th century. So he said, democracy does not mean that the majority rules. Democracy means that everyone agrees that the rules are fair. What are your thoughts on that?
That he believes that the rules are fair.
That's what democracy means. It does not mean that the majority rules. It simply means that everyone agrees that the rules are fair.
Because in a way, think that, well, say if there's a rabid animal in a place, and 2 out of 3 people say to shoot it. Well, one out of that 3 says not to. Say if they do go with not shooting it, more people would be upset with the government or whatever if that animal was not shot. More people would be upset with that. Well, the minority would be satisfied. In that way, well, yes, that minority is technically being swept under the rug. At that point, that's more of what the people want. More people want that.
The rules are fair.
Yes, there's more power in that section, therefore it should be taken.
What are your thoughts on that quote, Raphael?
Okay, my thoughts on that quote is that, the way I understand it, you're saying that you establish some rules, some laws, and then as long as everybody agrees that the laws are fair, then that represents democracy.
That is democracy. According to Robert Dahl.
According to Robert Dahl. Well, I believe that democracy meant when people went to vote and the people chose either laws or the way that they did it back in Athens, where all the people would get up together and they would all vote in order to pass a law or pass something. Now that is what is referred to as democracy, and that's what the founding fathers also referred to as democracy.
Well, yeah, but still, regardless, there's never going to be a point in time when everybody agrees on one thing. Not everybody's going to believe that animal should have been shot, or vice versa. The point is, while you can never get everybody happy, the best you can do is get most of everyone happy. And that's kind of what democracy is working with. That's why voting exists. So you can see how much more does one side have than the other. That way you can see how much more people will be satisfied with the answer as opposed to the other.
Okay. Now, I want to finish off this podcast with telling you guys about a Gallup poll that was made last year. Okay?
A what?
A Gallup poll. The company Gallup.
Oh,
okay. So this poll just asked people, how much do you trust Congress or your American democracy in general? In 1789, that was 40%. Right now, it's at 17%. Why do you think that is?
I think because of the media coverage and how the news have represented the politics and everything has really become a part of our daily lives. They really have gone to the extremes to make other opponents seem bad, to make the government look bad, coming up with different theories. Just recently they were saying that the president was colluding with Russia, and they just finished an investigation. They found out that no, he wasn't colluding with Russia. during these past 2 years, they have been reporting that almost like recently, like monthly, constantly, and then it just turns out to be false. And who do we blame for that? The news, the media. They decide to put something out just because it fits their political agenda. Many of the news sites or the news companies, they do not like the President Donald Trump, or they do not like the Republicans. So at any sudden rumor or anything, they'll put something that'll make them seem bad. So that is why many of the people in the United States will probably feel insecure about the government or whatever, because the media does have a great influence on many people.
All right. You, John?
I agree with a lot of stuff that he said. Mostly the part where how he mentions how, due to the media's own personal wantings, they will jump on something, even if it's minuscule, merely to make a story so that it will make somebody look bad. What they realize this is as well is that this affects what people think about these people, because if an article is written about how Donald Trump says that he's going to, blow up the moon, not everybody's going to be completely positive, but they're going to see an article by a company they trust saying, "Oh no, Donald Trump's going to blow up the moon." Therefore, they think, "Wow, Donald Trump is a maniac. He's going to blow up the moon." And so that begins to make people believe, well, maybe he's not that great of a president. And so it affects their own personal beliefs, and also not only in Donald Trump, but also in the government in general, because he's just a representative. So that's why I believe it's gone down.
I wanted to add something about the Electoral College. So the Electoral College, the purpose of the Electoral College is so the small states don't get screwed over. Because if you were to base it on the popular vote, then many of the presidential candidates, they would only focus on the most populous areas of the United States. So they would go to California, they would go to New York, they would go to Florida, and they forget about all of Middle of America, right? And that's why the founding fathers, they decided to do the Electoral College, so the smaller states wouldn't be screwed over. Because only a small parts of the country would get what they want. Meanwhile, the main area of the country would be screwed over. So if they pass something that would require us to pay more taxes, let's say, and the majority of the people who voted for that were the ones in the city, then the people who would be paying it, which is the rest of the people that are in the middle of America, they'd be paying for a tax that they didn't even want. That's why they did the Electoral College, so they would have equal representation. And also it really helps because it makes it more fair, because it all depends on the way that the presidential candidate strategizes in order to win. So the presidential candidate needs to make more visits to other smaller states and as well as the big states, and they have to find a different way to convince more people to vote for them. That way everybody gets equal representation, and it's more fair.
Okay. Well, I agree with some of your details and your points, but then again, I always just go back to the competition is no longer between states. It is between political parties. And to prove this, this is how I'm going to finish off, all right? I'm just going to give you guys a quick thought experiment, all right? Let's say that there is a bill currently in Congress, right? And it's for statehood for Puerto Rico and D.C., right? Okay. So, those two are small states, assuming they would become states. Would Wyoming or Wisconsin, states with a smaller population, would they vote yes to become, for Puerto Rico and DC to become states because it would increase the power of smaller states? Or would they vote no because it would increase the power of Democrats? I'll leave that up to you. Thank you.